Good afternoon. I'm Carlos Fernandez, Policy Analyst at the Vegas Chamber. I'd like to thank you all for tuning into our 2020 Special Legislative Session webinar featuring members of the Vegas Chamber Board of Trustees, our Vegas Chamber Lobbyist, and the Vegas Chamber President and CEO, Beth Sewald. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to explain the features of this call. In order to preserve high sound quality, we'll be muting everyone on the call besides our presenters to make it easier for everyone to hear. If you'd like to ask a question, there are a few ways you can do so. If you're joining this call on the web or through the mobile app, you can ask a question by using the chat feature on the interface. We'll ask you a question on your behalf. You can also ask a question by clicking the hand raise button on the interface. We'll call your name and unmute your line so you can ask your question. Once you have asked your question, we'll remute your line so the call can hear the answer. In order to preserve time, we ask that you please keep questions brief, and we'll be taking all questions at the end of the call. Now, please welcome the Vegas Chamber President and CEO, Beth Sewald.
Thank you, Carlos. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar, which we hope will be enlightening. We hope we're all able to share a lot of great information today. We're hoping to give you the latest information on the upcoming special session and then the regular session as well. On the special session, the latest we've heard as of just a few minutes ago is that it potentially could be this next week, perhaps Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, but we'll get to our panelists in just a few minutes. Also want to remind everybody that this webinar is going to be posted on vegaschamber.com. So you're welcome to head to our website after this and view it again as well. Before I introduce our speakers, I want to remind you about just a couple of things at the Chamber, a couple of programs. Leadership Advance, we are still accepting applications for that. It's a 5-month program tailored to help specifically, it's designed for those professionals who want to enhance your leadership skills. So if you're interested in attending or finding out more about Leadership Advance, head to the website at leadership.vegas. Also, the Southern Nevada Forum committees are convening and making change right here in Southern Nevada. This program has a long history of making very important change across the entire state. So for more information there, reach out to Dylan Keith at the Chamber, and that's dkeith@vegaschamber.com. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our expert panelists today. What we're going to do is I'm going to introduce each of them, and then they're going to give some brief remarks, and then we'll take some Q&A from our audience. So without any further ado, Vegas Chamber Chairman of the Board of Trustees, Mr. Tom Burns, is with us. Tom, Creighton Pike, thank you for being here. Thank you. Mr. Hugh Anderson, Chairman of our Government Affairs Committee. He's the chairman, and he's also with Hightower. Thanks for being with us today. Mr. Jim Wadhams, he's a Vegas Chamber Lobbyist with Black and LoBello. Mr. Wadhams, thank you, sir, for being with us.
Thank you.
And then last but certainly not least, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs at the Vegas Chamber, Mr. Paul Moradkhan. Paul, thank you very much. All right. Very good. Mr. Chairman, Tom Burns, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about the Chamber, the value of the Government Affairs Department, and then the Chamber investment in government affairs and why that's so important to our members in general.
Sure. So first of all, the Chamber has an amazing reputation statewide as it relates to government affairs. And really that has a lot to do with the leadership that Hugh has provided and the hard work that Paul has. Their reputation, even among those that necessarily don't disagree with or don't agree with our positions on occasion, is that the Chamber shoots straight from the hip and the information you're going to get is straight. So they command a great deal of respect in Carson City. And this gives businesses like mine, we have 50 employees at Creighton Pike, and I really wouldn't be able to muster up the resources to have our own lobbying force. But through the Chamber, we're able to band together, and through the Chamber, we're able to have a voice up in Carson City that's very significant.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hugh Anderson, you're the chairman of our Government Affairs Committee, and you have been for many years. Give us a little bit of insight into how the Government Affairs Committee works.
We have a dedicated roster committee that comes from a diverse background of industry sources, different industry sectors, as it were, and we choose these volunteers very carefully for their not only their expertise in their chosen profession, Mary Beth, but also their expertise in understanding good public policy. And we're looking for people who are not partisan in nature, but are recognize that coming together and finding solutions to complex problems is what's best for our members and our community. And so the process that we go through is very diligent. These are the unsung heroes. The people on the screen are absolutely instrumental to helping the chamber achieve the prominence that Tom alluded to. But our Government Affairs Committee does an extraordinary amount of work and committed time to get the job done for our members and the community. So it's something I'm very, very proud of, and that's why I have been the chairman for so long, because number one, they'll have me, but number two, because they do such wonderful work.
Well, and you are not the least of which to be mentioned as an unsung hero is you. I know you're a huge advocate of the fact that, and we're always encouraging our members to get involved. Why do you think it's so important for members to be engaged?
Well, my philosophy, Mary Beth, with my long years with the chamber, is that our members, as Tom again alluded to, most of our members don't have the resources to worry about anything but keeping their doors open through the next week. They don't have the resources to worry about anything but getting their employees paid and keeping their customers satisfied. And oh, by the way, the owner is always the last one to get paid. Those are the people we represent. Those are the people who we need to make sure that we are protecting as best we can, because quite frankly, they can't lift their heads up from their work to recognize that they have a target on their back. And so as they're writing the checks for the latest fee or the latest tax or the latest registration concept, we have to make sure that we're making sure that that's, number one, as minimal as it possibly can be to help with their success, and number two, to also make sure that those funds are going to good public use that, again, will come back to benefit them.
All right, thanks, Hugh. We appreciate all your work and blood, sweat, and tears as well. Up next is Mr. Jim Wadhams. He's a longtime partner of the Vegas Chamber. Jim, you've worked with our teams off and on for many, many years. Give us a little bit of an overview of the landscape in Carson City and what we can expect.
Glad to do it, and thanks for having me. Over a long number of years, I've been involved in the Carson City activity, and each period of time, each 2-year cycle is always a little bit different. What we were looking forward to right now is what we call a special session, and that doesn't mean that it's going to be special like fun or special like bad. It just means that it will be different than a regular session. Regular sessions in Nevada will start again in February of 2021. The discussion is that we need a special session because the governor, in collaboration with the legislature, need to move additional monies to fill the gap that's created by the lack of revenue that's come into state and local government for the last 4 months. So we have a political landscape, and most of the listeners will be aware of this. Governor Sisolak is, of course, a Democrat. The Assembly has a majority of Democrats, and the Senate has a majority of Democrats. Republicans are represented. There are good legislators on both sides of that issue, and the reason they'll be coming to this special session is primarily to make sure that the legislature and the governor agree with where some additional funds can be found. It's going to be very important that the public is very much aware of where cuts are going to occur. It is highly unlikely that we will get out of this without making major cuts, and that sets the beginning discussion for the next legislative session. One of the key things that happens anytime the legislature gathers is communication with the community, and that includes us. Everybody on this call is a voice. Everybody on this call has a position. It's going to be very difficult because of the COVID-19 for the legislature to meet in a traditional fashion. They have already announced plans essentially to have the legislators and the immediate staff in the legislative building, but no one else except the press will be allowed in. So for those of us that are interested in what's happening, it's going to be a real challenge. We're going to have to be very watchful on video monitors and the like. For most of the members, I think it's going to be critical that you watch for the chamber alerts and the chamber communications. because Paul Moradkhan and his team and my team, we will be in Carson City, peering in the windows of the legislative building, if you will, and trying to communicate to the public. Your reaction to what you hear will be critical to help the governor and the legislature actually understand the impacts of decisions they're making. So if I could make one statement today, it would be, please, please pay attention, listen to the chamber, react to what you hear, both in the press and from the chamber. That feedback will be funneled right back to Carson City, and that's going to be critical to help the legislature and the governor make the best possible decisions.
All right, Jim. Thank you very much. We appreciate your partnership and all the work that you've done and expertise that you've given us over many years. Up next is Paul Moradkhan. He's the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs at the Vegas Chamber. And Paul is somebody I couldn't be more proud of. He works so hard, but he's garnered so much respect among leadership in Carson City and throughout the entire state. So Paul, thanks for being with us today, and give us your take on the role of the Vegas Chamber and then your leadership among the trade associations and how that works and how that's such an asset to leadership in Carson City.
Thanks, Mary Beth, and thank you for those kind words. Absolutely. So the Chamber has spent the last several years really building a level of trust with all the trade associations in the state, north and south. When we knew a united business community would be a more efficient one and a stronger one in the state capital on a variety of issues. And I think we've been successful in really serving as that convener, bringing all the different business groups together, because we all engage in so many different issues, from tax policy to education, workers' comp, healthcare mandates. So I think we've done a good job really reaching out to our partners and really building a level of communication. Jim touched on a little bit. I think one of the things the Chamber does really well is communicating not just with our members, but with the trade associations, other chambers in the state, and of course also with legislators. And to Jim's point, we always share that, tell them exactly where we stand. We believe in a method of sharing data and information in a transparent process. So that develops a level of trust where there's never surprise from where the Chamber is coming from. And I think we've built a solid reputation over the years that we're a straight shooter as an organization. We want what's best for Nevada, and the Chamber has had a legacy for over 100 years, and that's something we're proud of as we go to every single session stronger as a business community as we work together.
Okay, thank you, Paul, and thank you again to all of our panelists today. Just as a reminder, we are open to taking your questions. Feel free to type them in, or you can actually speak and ask your question in person. So with that, I'm going to start with Mr. Wadhams. Jim, you mentioned a lack of revenue. That's top of mind for everybody, all of us. It's what's keeping us awake at night. Besides that, what do you think are going to be some of the biggest challenges for lawmakers for not only the special session, but the regular session as well?
Well, let me start with that point. We don't want to leave that one too quick, Mary Beth, because the way you asked that question really is the common element for all of us on this call and those who will be in Carson City, and that's the lack of revenue. When business shut down, employees get laid off, their revenue becomes interrupted, the business revenue becomes interrupted, the corresponding tax revenue for the local governments and state government becomes interrupted. The most obvious example with the gaming industry shut down for the last 4 months, that's millions of dollars of revenue that drives programs for the state that's been lost. So I don't want to beat too much on that, but the legislature is responsible for having a balanced budget and working with the governor to do that. So that's going to be a big, big issue. Other areas that could be brought onto this agenda, and the agenda is set, technically it's set by the governor by proclamation. As a political process, he will discuss this with the leadership of both houses, and they will decide what issues will be on that agenda. Those issues that are being discussed include racial justice, police reform, potentially election reform, enhancements to DETR to try to modify the process of unemployment claims. There will be issues potentially of liability that affect third parties coming into businesses. I think there's a range of questions that could be discussed, and that's what's going on between the governor and the leadership of the two houses is they're trying to find the amount of time that they can allocate and the breadth of the discussions that they can resolve in a fairly short period of time. These are usually limited to 3 to 5 days for a legislative process. And as a result, they're going to have to try to find 2, 3, or 4 issues perhaps that they can address.
It sounds like a very short period of time. I mean, is it typical that we're able to get much done in 3 to 5 days, Jim?
Over the course of history, sometimes we have done some pretty major things, but rarely do we do a number of major things. Usually a special session will be fairly narrow. Many decades ago, we had to talk about an engineering school. Many decades ago, we had a special session on medical malpractice. But those usually are fairly limited in the scope because the time and attention necessary to do it is going to be limited. So I would think that the governor and the leadership of the two houses will end up with 2 or 3 issues, possibly 4, but probably 2 or 3.
Okay, this next question comes from one of our viewers, and Jim Wadhams, you touched on this, but how is the Nevada open meeting law being met with the special session guidelines, with not allowing the public in and so forth, and just media?
That's a terrific question because it seems to come up every regular session, and it's definitely come up in the special session. And the problem we have right now, well, let me back up. Our state constitution requires the legislature to meet open to the public. LCB's attorneys have done a pretty in-depth analysis, and given our modern times, they have come to the conclusion that being accessible to the public through systems like this, through virtual seminars, virtual webinars, where people can talk back and forth, is the modern equivalent of what would happen if we did not have this pandemic and the health crisis, and people could actually populate the building. So the simple answer is the open meeting law does not apply to the legislature, but the constitutional requirement is that they be open to the public. Legislative council staff has determined they can accomplish that through virtual sessions such as we're having right now.
But the public won't be as, it won't be as accessible for the public to actually participate, but what you're saying is they'll be able to watch.
The public will be able to watch, the public will be able to send in emails, there will probably be some open microphone opportunities. I think it's going to be just as frustrating for the legislators as it will be for many members of the public, because frankly, they're there to serve the public's interest, and not having access to communication directly in the normal fashion that we're used to, I think will be frustrating for everybody. And again, I think that's why connecting through the chamber will be helpful in getting as much of that information back to the legislators as possible.
Yeah, you're definitely right. I think it's going to be more important now than ever that our members and the business community is connected with the biggest chamber, so that we have a direct connection to the legislators in Carson City, and we have every intention of conveying their concerns. So Hugh Anderson, on that note, in your mind, you've been around the chamber and politics in Nevada for not that many years, but a few. What would success look like in your mind for the business community in the special session?
Well, going back to Jim's comment about the number of agenda items, I would like to see the first and foremost agenda item be recognizing the budget issues that we're facing, and having our legislators focus on right-sizing that budget to the practical realities on the ground currently. Regrettably, that means cuts, and everybody has their favorite parts of government that they think shouldn't be cut or are running bare bones, but the reality is they have to be organized in such a manner to face the fact that we've had a devastating economic blow again in this community, in this state. And more importantly, this time it's unique because when you have travel bans not only internationally, but domestically, it's going to hurt a tourism and hospitality-based economy. And so there is no room for any discussion of revenue raising or anything of that ilk. So we have to recognize that just as our business community has been immediately affected with no forewarning and no get out of jail free cards, our public sector has to recognize that their service model has to be adjusted accordingly for the foreseeable future until we can get to the point where the economy is stabilized and begins to grow again, which it will, but it's just a matter of how long.
Okay, thank you, Hugh. And I guess it's official now. I just got a news flash that Governor Sisolak just announced the special session starting July 8th. So if you hadn't already heard that just in the last few seconds while Hugh was talking, that just came out. So, you know, we've talked about, Jim and Hugh, you both talked about the top things that are going to be on the list, we think: budget, DETR, criminal justice, and so forth. Chairman Burns, limited liability has been an issue that has been on the top of the minds of our members. We hear that a lot, and it's on the top of your mind as well. What are your thoughts about what that legislation should look like, and what are some of your biggest concerns about limited liability?
There are a couple of issues there, Mary Beth. First is that, you know, this event was pretty unprecedented and kind of came out of nowhere at some level. And it would have been impossible to be fully prepared to protect the public as well as your employees from the outbreak of coronavirus. So for those employers and those businesses that are practicing the safe protocols outlined by the governor, by CDC, I think it is not appropriate to assume that you automatically caught the coronavirus because you walked into Susie Scoop's ice cream shop, or that you walked into some other place of business. Now, certainly there are certain occupations that lend itself to exposure from that, and I think there could be some discussion, for instance, in the healthcare world, that if you're serving in an intensive care unit and you catch corona, there's a high likelihood you caught it at work. And that's part of the exposure, and certainly we could live with that. Other states have made that presumption, but it's not necessarily presumptively accurate to say that somebody caught it because they went to work in their office setting. And so there have been states, for instance, California has made it presumptive liability upon the part of the employer that if their employee is sick, it's assumed that that person caught it at work, he or she caught it at work, and not at the barbecue they were at on Saturday night or any other place they were at. And so the concern is that would put an unwarranted amount of stress on business and their ability to function and go forward.
Okay, well, and we got a question while you were talking, Tom, and this one is for Tom or Jim. Can you discuss the current situation around reducing the liability for a business that does comply with CDC and Southern Nevada Health District on best practices versus a bad actor business?
Well, certainly those that are, and Jim, please chime in as I wind down, but certainly those folks that are negligent, that are ignoring the practices that are put forward by the CDC, that are being reckless, should be held accountable for their actions. But for those that are doing it, that are following the CDC guidelines, I think it should be assumed that they have done what they needed to do and they're doing their best to keep their employees and the general public safe.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tom. Oh, Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, let me jump in behind Tom on that. I think it's important to note that business that has recently reopened is certainly struggling to increase their capacity to deal with customers or whatever their business model may be, to protect their employees. Guidelines have been issued throughout this emergency process. And I think the point that Tom is making is that a business that is living up to the responsibilities that have been placed on it by the guidelines issued by CDC, OSHA, and the governor should be presumed to be doing what they need to do to be acting responsibly. The risk if we don't do that is it becomes a process of catch if catch can, and employers are always having to wonder, gee, is there something more I need to do that I haven't heard about from OSHA or CDC? And that kind of anxiety is going to slow the recovery process of business significantly.
Okay. This next question is for Paul. Paul, have you heard any pre-legislative session, special session discussions from the executive or legislative branches about increasing business taxes? What are you hearing on the street?
Sure, that's a great question. I mean, there have been conversations, with different groups, interest groups about taxes for the special session. Obviously, there has to be a focus about reduction in the budget because it's $1.3 billion projected revenue shortfall right now. Obviously, the Chamber is talking to legislators, trying to get a sense of what those tax proposals, if any, could occur. It's a fluid situation, as all of us know, about what may emerge on the proclamation for next week. But the Chamber is absolutely engaged on that conversation. And we'll keep our members posted. To Jim's point on the Carson City alerts, on the rundown, we'll be doing calls every day from special session for the membership to keep them updated. But historically, taxation policies during a special is something that we would prefer to see in a regular session.
Okay, and Tom and Hugh, we talk a lot about how important it is that legislators hear directly from businesses, because they can hear from me or Paul, or they can hear from Mr. Wadhams, all good, reliable sources. But why does it make such a difference for them to hear directly from the business themselves?
Well, I'll jump in and say the three of you only represent 3 votes. And more importantly, hearing directly from a constituent who is being directly affected by that policy implication is the most powerful testimony they can hear. Jim or Paul can convey a story about someone else, but when that person is standing in front of them with the battle scars of keeping a business alive and thriving, that makes an impact far more profound than anything a professional team can do.
And let me follow up with that. I need our folks that are on this webinar to know your voice does matter. They do listen to you. You do move the needle when you reach out to your legislator and let them know how you're being affected. So to Jim's point, he said earlier, as we send out bulletins and highlights and alerts from the Chamber, we need you to respond. That's how we move the needle on this, and you will make a difference.
Okay. As we know, live events and trade shows make up a huge portion of the business and the economy for the entire state of Nevada. How do the COVID restrictions affect the attendance of our overall economy? And is there legislation that could help with these types of businesses?
I think a lot of that goes back to the conversation about the different phases of the reopening of the economy about those events. So as we work through phase 2, and right now to focus on folks about keep flattening our curve, those will be directives that come to the governor's office as for anticipation about larger events later on, potentially this fall or winter. But that will be as a phase in as we reopen over the next couple months.
I'd like to jump in behind what Paul said, because I think it's so critical. As we're seeing right now on the national news, there seems to be an uptick in the number of cases reported and the hospitalization, particularly in some of our neighboring states like Arizona and Texas, although they're not a neighboring state. I guess my point is they're southwestern states. And so we all know that our governor is trying to be very careful about making sure that the pace of this reopening is measured. And frankly, it's going to come because we have a coronavirus that seems to transmit itself very easily and much differently than almost anything we've seen. And it's going to be critical that the governor's recent order that we wear masks is adhered to. I think we all have them at hand, and we can't get to the larger gatherings until we can figure out how we can effectively get 100% or 95% compliance with wearing masks so that people can be safe in larger gatherings. So I think that's probably a way off, but Mary Beth, as you point out, that's part of the lifeblood, particularly of our Southern Nevada economy. And the sooner we can get there safely, the better and the quicker our recovery will be.
And Mary Beth, if I can just jump in, going back to Tom's point about liability, convention organizers and so forth need to know that they can be held harmless if they put on a convention and their employees or participants travel to the convention voluntarily, and we've done all of the CDC requirements, and if one of them gets sick, they got sick, and it doesn't go back and haunt the employer who organized the convention.
And again, the chamber is not advocating for bad actors, for example. I mean, we encourage everybody to follow the CDC guidelines and to keep their employees safe and to keep their patrons safe. So that's not what this is about at all. But the folks who are following the guidelines, we just want to protect them and make sure that they are not subject to frivolous lawsuits.
Right.
Go ahead, Jim.
If we have, I'm trying to be brief, but I think one of the elements that we cannot overlook in this is that most of all of the businesses that participate in the chamber have employees. In fact, the chamber collectively probably represents businesses that have 60, 70, 80% of the workforce. Bringing employees back to work safely is critical for any business to have success. And so it has to be a combination of personal responsibility, wearing a mask, washing your hands, but being safe at work so that the customers can draw our workforce back into employment. Being unemployed and stuck at home is probably not fun for anybody.
And none of our member employers who are successful don't recognize that the number one asset they have in their company are their employees. And so they need them healthy and ready to work.
Very true. Okay. As you guys know, we're looking at about a $1.3 billion shortfall. And this question could go to any of you, but do you think the state is going to be able to fix that with budget cuts, or are we going to need more federal assistance? It depends.
Well,
Go ahead.
let me jump in on that in two ways. First of all, the governor moved very quickly to declare a fiscal emergency, which gave him the power to have a committee of the legislature transfer what's called the rainy day funds to the governor's control. A good decision and a good action by the legislature and the governor. There has been money that has been sent from the federal government. Some of it has a lot of strings attached. Some of it has some strings, and some of it is more flexible. And that's part of what the legislature and the governor's staff have been working on, trying to maximize their ability to use those federal funds that have come in so far. I think the session is going to be focusing on finding other reservoirs, other pockets of money that have not been utilized yet that are already in the state that can be identified. And of course, all of us hope that additional assistance comes from the federal government. We in Nevada have to have a balanced budget. We can't spend money we don't have. We're not the federal government. So that's why the cuts loom so large. We can't just create funds.
That number is certainly a daunting number. And given the state of the economics of other states in our country, I would not be surprised if some legislation came out from the federal government that would support the states. That being said, we have to be responsible and make the necessary adjustments to our budget that get us in line until we receive those funds.
Okay. All right. Speaking of cuts and where money's going to come from and things like that, just last week we had a webinar with Dr. Jesus Jara, CCSD school superintendent, and he was presenting his plan for reopen and how he's balancing the safety of the students with the budget that he has to work within. How does any of you see that folding into this legislative session, and what do you think will happen regarding K through 12?
Well, I think if I could just jump in there, I think that's one of those really challenging line items that no one wants to see cut. We want to see fully funding to make sure our students get the best, because every year that passes where they're not getting the best education experience is a lost year for those students. But that being said, it is a huge, huge portion of the budget. It is very focused among our legislators in each session, and Jim can talk further on that. So it is a challenging issue, and it then becomes down to our legislative leadership to decide from a priority perspective what has to be protected versus what regrettably needs to be cut maybe further. So, periodically we'll see, should we cut the budget across the board, or should there be phased cuts or what have you? And this is a question of the community's priorities, quite frankly.
Anyone else want to weigh in?
Yeah, I don't know that K through 12 will be able to escape any cuts at all. But I'm certainly not of the opinion that all programs are created equal. And some of the programs need to take deeper cuts in order to preserve what we can for the education of K through 12.
One of the difficulties is that the state's general fund budget doesn't have a lot of room to make major cuts. And that's why this issue, I think, is so critical, that the legislature and the governor work together to find the best method of sharing that cut, spreading it as well as they can. With the welfare and Medicaid budgets and the health and human services, the education budgets for both higher education and K through 12, and frankly, the Department of Prisons, those three budgets make up about 70 to 72% of the entire general fund. And so with the need to make significant reduction, it's going to be very difficult not to see some impact. The superintendent's presentation, I thought, was excellent. The problem, as many of your listeners know, it's not entirely clear yet whether the health situation will allow the gathering of school children, or how many school children, in how many settings, in how many classrooms. And that presents a huge challenge for the balance for the school year that starts in the fall. We don't have our hands around this coronavirus yet. We're just not sure how that's going to play out.
So what do you think are the chances, and I kind of bite my tongue saying this, but what are the chances? I know it's going to depend on the curve and if we have more cases, and unfortunately Nevada has had a couple of record days in a row. Do you see the possibility of Nevada going back to a phase one? We hope not.
Right. I don't think that's impossible. I think it would be very challenging to the state and be more devastating than the first shutdown would be. So I think the caution that the governor has shown as far as extending phase two is wise, because the economic outcomes also have social outcomes. In the state of Nevada, we've seen an increase in domestic violence and mental health issues, and those are all things that are a result of what happened in the shutdown. And I'm not of the opinion it didn't matter. Mary Beth has heard me say more than once, this issue did not come with a set of instructions on it or a handle to carry. So it's easy to second guess what the governor has done, but realistically, going back would be pretty tragic, I think.
And I think we also have to keep in mind that the federal government has done an extraordinarily rapid job of providing support to businesses and individuals through various programs and enhanced benefits and so forth. And now you're seeing the political sticking points of the pending expiration of those supports and whether they should be extended, and if they are extended, to what degree and so forth. And if they're not extended, or if Washington ends up not agreeing on something and nothing happens, then going back, as Tom alluded to, will have very important health repercussions that are catalyzed by the economic shutdown or slowdown, as it were. So that we can't ignore that as well.
Okay. Paul, I know that you have worked tirelessly over the years. You work with the trade associations, you communicate with them on a regular basis, and you've been able to you've all worked together to create a very sort of close-knit group, and you communicate regularly. What are going to be some of the primary points of focus for you at the special session, and then also for this group as well?
Sure, that's a great question. I think to the point that Tom and Hugh brought up, obviously there will have to be budget cuts, and working with the trade groups, because not all cuts are the same to different programs. We know there's already cuts coming in higher education, and we've seen some impact that UNLV will have with the medical school and the engineering school, for example. But I think that what we'll be working with the trade partners is there is a conversation about revenue enhancements. Is that broad-based? How does that impact different industry sectors? So we'll be watching that closely, working together on that, because to the point that Jim earlier made, cutting 1.3 billion would be difficult without some sort of federal assistance that hopefully will come in the next package, but that probably won't be until end of July or early August, if that's the timeline that we're hearing. But we'll be working with the trades to make sure that if there is impact, it's something that all the business community work on together to move forward, and not ensure that one industry is not picked over another one, but to work together as a group.
Yeah, or that one industry is not singled out, and so forth. It's worked very well, I would say, for these groups to have had a cohesive, unified voice, and everybody's really been working well together. And I think that's been added to the success of business in general in the state.
Absolutely.
And Mary Beth, if I could just chime in on what Paul's been able to accomplish the last multiple years with the various trade associations. He's been able to reinforce in all of these groups' minds that regardless of which industry sector or type of company you run, the overlap of concerns, the commonalities is dramatically large. And then there are unique aspects to each of our businesses and sectors. But at the end of the day, a vibrant, healthy, growing economy is what we all seek. And like you said, making sure that good public policy never singles out a particular industry or vulnerable entity for any reason, and the impacts of any kind of revenue enhancements and so forth are evenly spread out and appropriate, and the money's well spent, and we see results.
Well, as Mr. Wadhams likes to say, spread the wealth, right, Jim?
Well, one of the things that we learned with this in the last 4 months is that as everybody has said, we are all in this together, and part of the recovery is recognizing that getting people back to work is the first step in the recovery. But to get people back to work, they've got to have work to go to, and we've got to have businesses that are safe for those employees to come to and for the customers to come in. And so all of the issues we've talked about today, I think all tie back to the commitment that we all have to each other, that we've got to take these steps together safely and get the economy going again. Because if we have to keep cutting and there is no place to get additional government revenue, we're going to be in a very sad state of affairs for a number of years.
Paul or Jim or any of you, have you heard any rumors of the governor mandating a 14-day quarantine, much like some of the other states are doing for Nevada?
I have not heard that in the recent conversations talking to our partners. I mean, anything is, of course, a tool that the governor could choose to do so with his emergency directives, but we have not heard anything about that in the last few weeks.
Okay, we just know that Governor Cuomo just added Nevada to the New York list, so it's a question. Chairman Burns, Tom, what would you say would be some of the opportunities that businesses could, we've talked a lot about what are going to be some of the challenges, you know, what are the things we're going to have to work on? What do you think are the opportunities?
Well, as we went through the crisis of the Great Recession, I think a lot of us learned what was necessary to operate your business, and we found out that maybe we were running a little fat. So this was an opportunity for us to revisit what that is. I think there's some opportunities too for employers to galvanize their staff. You know, there's a school of thought that as leaders, if you don't create a saga within your business, a saga will be created for you, and it's usually not the one you want. And so this is an opportunity as leaders to go forward and rally your employees and your teammates and let them know that we truly are in this together and that we're going to get through it. There's a plan, there's a path for us to get to the other end and get to normal. Finally, it's an opportunity for you to become good community partners and pay attention to your neighbors and those not-for-profits that are in need. So I think there's some, as Winston Churchill said, you should never waste a good crisis, right? And so this is an opportunity to grow and change.
This is a good one, all right. For the rest of you, Jim, go ahead. You were going to speak.
I just think Tom made such a good point, and I think hopefully as we get to the next regular session, there's probably going to be a need to find ways to enhance revenue, because if you keep cutting, pretty soon you're getting down to the real basics of education, police, fire, and the things that we fundamentally need to survive. So there will probably be discussion about raising revenue, but because we all recognize that we're in this together, that means that we all need to participate, which is the point that I think Paul Moradkhan made a bit ago. Taxes, as we look at them, need to be broad-based so that it can be spread, so that no one sector carries the burden of success or failure of all of us. We all have to be participating, and those discussions hopefully will be in February, but in some respects they could be discussed preliminarily, hopefully in this special session before that.
Okay. Paul, we've talked a lot about, you know, how the chamber advocates on behalf of our members and that we're in direct contact with legislators on behalf of our members. But what do you recommend to any members or anybody for that matter who may need to get in touch with the legislator? What should they do?
No, that's a great question. I think Nevada is very fortunate where you can still access your state senator or assembly member. They're pretty transparent on the legislative website about posting their cell numbers, their emails. So it's easy to get hold of them. And also a lot of them, they're good on text message too and stuff. So if they posted their cell number, give them a buzz, send an email. And we will reach out to members, of course, as special session starts up next week. We'll be putting out an announcement how they can reach their legislators and so they can access that information. But Nevada is a very easy state to access your elected official, unlike some other states, which I think we're pretty lucky as Nevadans we can do that.
But Mary Beth, if I can interject and reinforce what Jim said in his opening comments, chamber call to actions are vital, because when we send out a call to action, which is a very specific member communication, it is timely and many times urgent. And if we're talking about a special session, for instance, that's only going to last 3-4 days, what have you, and if we were to send out a call to action, that means something of real import is brewing at the legislature, and our members need to communicate to those members of our governing body that their issues need to be heard, whether they're agreeing with them or not agreeing with them. But we want to make sure that our members recognize the difference in our communication. Some are just to be keeping them up to date on issues, and others, we need them, because again, a handful of our folks cannot get the job done if it becomes urgent.
Absolutely. It definitely takes all of us, and we appreciate the voices of our members, and we try to convey those voices and their messages, and we connect them with the legislators as much as we possibly can, because we know the importance of that. In closing, did anyone have any other closing remarks? We know the special session is slated for next July 8th. I think that's next Wednesday, Thursday and Friday. And we know that the top topics we think are going to be budget, DETR, and criminal justice. So having said that, does anyone have any other final remarks before we close today?
I would just, if I could, Mary Beth, I would encourage our members to watch for the email announcements about how they can be involved, the updates we'll be providing, the daily phone calls and video chats with our team up in Carson City. We will be in Carson City working remotely, even though we're not going to be able to access the building. the GA leadership team, Chairman Burns and Mary Beth, will be up in Carson. So we'll be up there to support our members.
And you'll be doing a Paul call every day, right, Paul?
Yep. So we'll start them on Wednesday, and we'll do one every single day during session. So we'll have that scheduled out shortly to our membership.
Okay, great.
And Mary Beth, if I can just chime in, this economic event, this pandemic, has shined a white hot light again on the state's vulnerabilities, and the most vulnerable of our citizens, those who lack the skills to compete in a modern economy and so forth, make it clear that our education system has to be the best it can possibly be, not only K through 12, but higher ed. We have to make sure that job retraining is available in a cost-effective and a convenient way for our folks who are vulnerable to these kind of downturns, can get reskilled and be able to take care of themselves and their families going forward. So I'm not a big fan of that phrase, never waste a good crisis, but the reality is this is an opportunity for our legislators to put out the fire they're dealing with now with this massive budget shortfall, but then think about the longer term. How can we begin to pave the road for more future stability, not only for our citizens and our members, but also to expand industry, to expand our horizons so the great state of Nevada can be something that the rest of the country looks to beyond just our extraordinary tourist infrastructure and some of the other things that we do so well.
Thank you, Hugh. Well said. Mr. Wadhams, you had something to say, I think.
I just wanted to follow on what Paul Moradkhan said. If you can determine, and you should be able to, who your legislators are, your senator and your assembly person, be sure to let them know in any communication that you are that in that constituent, you are in that district. Our legislators go up there to represent their constituents. And if you identify yourself as one of their constituents, it moves your communication to the top of the list. So please make that extra effort.
Okay, and Chairman Burns, you'll have the last word.
Okay, well, first of all, I want you to know you should be very proud of your chamber staff. They are working diligently. They've been pretty amazing through this whole pandemic thing, putting in extra hours. Their compassion for the members has been amazing, and they've done just amazing things. So if you're a chamber member, you should be proud of the staff that we have. And let me re-say or repeat that you make a difference. That reaching out to your legislator and letting them know where you stand on something does move the needle. That's one of the blessings of being in Nevada. So I would encourage you to stay focused and stay attentive and support Paul and his team. Thank you.
Well, Chairman Burns, thank you so much for your leadership. We appreciate you. Your term has been nothing short of extraordinary in a lot of different ways. So we appreciate your leadership. Hugh Anderson, Chairman of our Government Affairs Committee, as always, just outstanding. Jim Wadhams and Team Wadhams, Jesse, and so forth, you guys, we appreciate your help. And Paul and the Government Affairs team at the Vegas Chamber, just the cream of the crop. So thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to all of our members who are on the line today. And know that we'll be heading to Carson City next week, and we will definitely keep you posted. And please feel free to reach out to us with any questions, concerns, or messages that you want us to take to Carson City. Thank you so much.